Okay. Okay. All right, so we're live, Julio.
Thank you. Can we go ahead and call the roll? I didn't forget this time.
Natasha, can you call the roll? Do you have the sign-in sheet? You're muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was talking and I was muted. Yes, I'm going to call roll. I'm going to call the committee members first, and then the board members who are not on the committee, I'll mark you present. Okay, when I call your name, just please unmute yourself. Julio Pena,
Here.
Pat Ruiz, Pat.
There I go.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Joan Body,
Yeah.
Beatrice Sapio,
Yeah.
John Johnston,
Hold on, baby.
John Johnston.
I'm here.
Thank
Here.
you. Marilyn Melman. Marilyn, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, here, you hear me?
Yep,
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Cindy Vanden Bosch.
Yes, here.
Hi. Okay, thank you. All right, Julio, all bylaws committee members are called for.
Thank you. And then just my last request, can you just assign me as a co-host so I can share my screen in a few minutes? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I had to look at my calendar. Today is the bylaws committee meeting. The item on the agenda is discussion on non-committee members voting at committee meetings, as we discussed at the last bylaws committee meeting. What we talked about is having this discussion and then finalizing the bylaws for final review. What we did, what I did and had did some research in the meantime was I had asked Jeremy to reach out to some of the other community boards in Brooklyn and find out what their process was for internal voting in with their committees. And what we found out was community boards 10, 11, 13, 15 do not allow non-board members who are not committee members to vote at committees. Community board 14 does, and it is explicit in their bylaws, which I read, and I'll share with you those in a moment. So I just wanted to share that because we did some background research. I went through, or at least attempted to go through some of their bylaws. The ones that do not allow board members to vote at committee meetings do not have their bylaws on their website, so I couldn't find it, and I didn't necessarily have the time to reach out to them and ask to get a copy of their bylaws. So that was the research. So I guess today it's having a discussion on what we think not what we think, but what we like to do in terms of having committee members voting or not voting, or having a vote on committee assignments. And I guess there's, you know, the way I thought about moving forward is I guess the pros and cons of having to discuss of it, and then just taking it from there. And I see Cindy's hand up first, so I'm going to go to Cindy.
Just a question of clarification for you said boards 10, 11, and a few others, they allow committee members, or non-committee members, but community board members. Like, just to clarify, it's community board members that maybe don't serve on those committees are allowed to vote if they attend the meeting. I just want to clarify what the research actually was, what the findings were. So it's community board members, and they allow the first kind of cluster of community boards you mentioned, they allow like people who aren't assigned to those committees but attend the meetings to still vote if they're there.
So what, sorry, yes, let me clarify.
Okay. Thanks.
Sorry if I wasn't clear. It has
Oh,
been a
no, it's okay.
very
It might be
long
me.
day. No, it has been a very long day. Community Board 14, from what we found out, was the only board that allows any community board member, regardless of your community assignment, to vote at a committee meeting. And that is explicit in their bylaws. Community boards 10, 11, 13, and 15 does not allow non-committee members to vote at committee meetings. So for example, if I show up to a transportation committee meeting, I'm not a member of transportation committee meeting, I can participate in discussion and talk, but when it comes to a voting decision, I do not vote. Thank you. Sorry. Yes. Go ahead, Cynthia. Gonzalez, sorry.
Okay. All right, I was waiting for that last clarification. Well, all I have to say is the following, that in the my committee, the Health and Mental Health Committee, we don't allow like general community members to participate in the vote, but because for a long time, our committee was so underattended that we had taken the position that if you were a board member, you can participate in the vote. So we did that, outside of bylaws or whatever. And my feeling is as follows, that since we have been on Zoom, and also the network that did it before, we have had so much more participation in committee meetings than ever before, which is a great thing because everybody, more people are getting the information at the same time as opposed to waiting for a report to come out. My feeling about this is that if you are a board member that comes to a committee meeting, you have the opportunity to verbalize, your position and whatever. My feeling is that you should be able to allow on the vote of the motion that's on the floor. I think that Board 14's policy, their position, and as stated on their bylaws, is something that should be pretty much standardized in my feeling. And if I'm wrong about this, I want to hear from people participating tonight why that shouldn't be so. Because when we have to go back to the community board with how we voted as a committee, what the committee outcome was, people still are able to chime in on that at the general board meeting. So I'm not sure how this is contrary to, what I'm proposing.
Thank you, Cynthia. Go ahead, Joan.
I agree with Cynthia, because many meetings that I have attended, there's practically nobody. And eventually we will be getting back to the office. When? Well, that's another story. But if I'm not mistaken, at one of Cindy's meetings where we took a vote, and I am not a committee member of that committee, but I was allowed to cast my vote. And I really, again, I am in favor of putting this in our bylaws.
Nick?
I have 2 points to consider. So I guess the first point is you could directly relate it to me and this committee. I don't sit on it, and yet I've probably attended every single one of the meetings, participated in each of the meetings. And if we were not to, do what both Cynthia and Joan has proposed, then essentially I would not get a voice, even though, I've done a fair amount of work in trying to push this forward. Now, on the other hand, you also can get a scenario like we did in a lot of the land use meetings with Industry City, where quite a few individuals who basically did not take part in the debates, did not take part in a lot of the work, but showed up basically to amend the resolution and more or less tilted the scales in terms of who was participating and, pushed through a number of amendments which otherwise would not have made it out of committee. So I think we need to find some kind of balance between the two of those. And I'm not sure how we do that. Maybe you have to attend, if you're not a member of that committee, you have to attend a certain number of meetings before you're permitted to vote, as an option or an idea. But, I would leave that for others to think about as well, on how we balance that.
Thanks, Nick. Karen? I think that's in the order. Sorry, they move so quickly, I can't tell what comes in what order.
Mute. Can you
There you
hear
go.
me now?
Yep.
Did you have a list of pro and con things, or are we writing that now?
So I did actually, and thank you for reminding me to click the share screen. I started jotting down a few of them, and I got distracted at work. So this, let me make it bigger so it's. So these were just the two things. So one of them is exactly what Nick, am I muted? Oh, sorry. One of the things was what Nick just said, which was I had a concern about in terms of the cons was I don't know what to name it, but I just wrote swarming.
We can't see what it's pro or con to, Julio. So I'm not sure whether it's pro or con letting them vote or pro or con not letting them vote.
Oh, that's a good point. I guess it's to letting non-committee members vote. I guess it's pros to voting and cons to voting.
Okay.
Again, sorry.
Okay, so
we're working very quickly.
So I have another quick question, and then I have a couple of comments. So when we become board members, we are all expected to, I think, be on 2 committees. Is that correct?
I think so, but I don't think that's also explicit.
And what are our expectations as board members with regards to attendance at those meetings, at those committees that we've been assigned to?
That's also not necessarily explicit. It's not explicit in the charter, and it's also not explicit in your community board application. We can make it explicit in our bylaws or in our committee, in our handbook that we're creating.
I think it should be explicit as to what the expectations are, because we all know that we don't sometimes always get assigned to the committees we want to be on. That's life. But I have a terrible problem with my committee. Sometimes I'm the only person who's shown up to meetings, the only one. So I'd be voting as a person of one, which is an interesting scenario. You know, I have. So I just want to put that out there. Another thing that I want to put out there is that we want to encourage committee participation. And I think personally that we should make voting in a committee more dependent on whether you've attended and are attending than whether you've been assigned at sometimes randomly to be on that committee. I think that if you're at the committee, first of all, to encourage people to come to the committee meetings, and we can be very explicit. We can say, if this committee has had one meeting on a topic, whoever shows up to that meeting should be able to vote. If they've had 2 meetings on that topic, you're expected to have shown up at both of those meetings in order to vote. You know, I think we can be very explicit about that, and also as a way of encouraging people to come to meetings and be responsible about it in the first place. And I think if you do take the trouble to go to a meeting, you should be allowed to vote. You know, I think it's a good policy, and I'll shut up now and let someone else speak.
No, that's a good point. And that's also why, like in the bylaws, the revision that we made earlier, we added the committee reassignment policy that every election year we did it kind of ourselves proactively this year, like randomly, but every election year we give board members an opportunity to submit for committee reassignments, so that if you're on X committees, you have an opportunity to either stay on those committees or apply for different committees or change your committees or add committees, or so that you're not necessarily on committees that you're not attending, or you can add to the committee portfolio for that very specific reason, because I don't think we necessarily had anything in place. Beverly, I saw your hand up and then it went down.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that certainly with Zoom, people have more of an opportunity to attend more of the meetings, which is pretty good, I think. If there is a particular issue in a neighborhood, I mean, let's say they were putting a building up on my corner and I wasn't on that committee meeting, I would want to be involved in that conversation. Of course, I could be involved in that conversation when it comes to public comment, so that the board, when the board votes as a whole, they know what my concerns are. I think if people are interested, I mean, we're all here because we want a better community. You know, we want a better neighborhood. We want a better togetherness. So I'm in favor of letting people that want to be on the committee to vote. I mean, that aren't, like, I'm not on this committee. And by the way, the attendance was not taken for any participants that are not committee members tonight. Are you laughing, Nick? Nick, are you laughing?
Yes, because I'm in the same boat.
I recorded those who were not on the committee. They recorded their attendance.
Yeah. So I'm in favor of, having people come to the committees, welcome them, and have them vote. And then, of course, the recommendation goes to the general population at the general meeting.
Thank you.
So it's just a recommendation, actually. All right, I'm gonna mute.
Pat?
I will say that having Zoom has been a really, really good vehicle, because I myself, I think I'm on 3 or committees. But for example, last week, there was a meeting every freaking night, and I attended each and every one. Had it not been for Zoom, I probably would not have attended all of those meetings because it was every night. So I kind of agree with, if you are a non-committee member, you must have at least attend 2 meetings on whatever the subject is, the big topic. Because I think about what happened with Industry City, when Nick brought it up. Those meetings got stacked, and I will use that word, got stacked as we got closer to the voting. I don't think I've ever seen any other meeting that was like that in the years that I've been on the community board. But I do definitely, I think about all of us and those who are not committee members. Like Cynthia said, she's been, and Beverly has been at every meeting for the bylaws committee because of Zoom. And I think that, having the opportunity to voice and vote is a good thing. So do we add a stipulation to it that you must attend at least 2 meetings before the vote? I don't know how that works, because you see how many meetings we've had for bylaws and we still haven't finalized it. So I'm not sure. Does that mean 2 in a row? Does that mean before it gets to the full board? I mean, those are just questions that I have in my head. But I do believe that if I'm attending a committee meeting of which I am not a committee member, but I am a loyal Community Board 7 member, I should be given the opportunity to vote. I hope that makes sense.
Cindy Vandenbosch.
Just one thing, and this is kind of piggybacking on what Beverly stated, but as a resident of Windsor Terrace, there are more board members that are kind of live in Sunset Park, and there are some meetings that take place, like if there's a transportation meeting and it's about an issue on my corner, like if we're thinking about democracy and like representing the interests of the neighborhood where we live and serve, sure, I could, I mean, I serve on the transportation committee, so maybe it's not the best example, but like if I didn't, it feels to me like, sure, okay, I use my persuasive powers if I don't have a vote, but shouldn't I have a vote? And so I want to raise that, because there are different kinds of issues, whether or not we serve on those committees, that may affect literally your block, and you can talk to your neighbors in advance of the vote and really think about how you want to vote, like in concerning your neighbors and community. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, like, I do think it's kind of interesting, because I also agree that there's this issue of stacking the vote at the last minute, and that's a problem. And is there any way to voluntarily, like, if there is one issue, you must have voluntarily, like, I don't know how we would monitor this, but you must have attended at least half of the meetings pertinent to that particular issue. And for the most part, it's going to be good faith, right? But if we notice that, like, there is a final vote and all of a sudden all these people come in that, like, haven't attended any of the other meetings, then we need to have a conversation about it. So I know it's a difficult thing to monitor, but it's also something that many of us kind of recognize was an issue with the Industry City vote. So I think it's good that we're discussing this. Thanks.
Yeah. David Estrada.
Yeah, so I keep reminding myself that everyone ultimately has a vote on anything that's before the board. So, so there's that as a backstop. I am sensitive to that idea of stacking a topic, and but I believe most of the time, most everyone's operating in good faith. I do think that someone who's lent time to a topic should be heard fully and offered a vote. at a committee level. Committee recommendations aren't binding anyway. They do affect what the board then ultimately can vote on in many cases. I'm wondering if in a scenario where the assigned members of a committee have taken a vote, in that vote, they have included some non-committee members who are community board members. If when that vote is expressed to the general board, that it should make clear that the assigned regular members of that committee voted, on a 3-2 split, and 4 other members of the community board who attended and voted this way, that in a way, there's kind of a way of also the bigger body of the community board perceiving when, a few people were, just passionate about a topic, as opposed to when a bunch of people showed up at the last minute because they want to kind of, pull the chain on the system. So maybe it's in the expression of the vote to the general board where there should be some explicit acknowledgement of who was voting on the committee and who was voting as a member not on the committee.
Thanks, David. Cynthia Gonzalez.
Yes, what I wanted to add to what I said earlier was that, well, first of all, let me start by saying that, with the endorsement for the Zoom in terms of people's participation in a committee or even at the general board meeting, there's a great endorsement. We know that Zoom is a great tool. And furthermore, I wanted to say that Zoom can also control people who get out of order better than when we are live, like, how should I say, in a regular meeting. It's harder to control a person, when they're in the public than when we're having Zoom, because Zoom, you can always mute them and their time is up and that's it. Now, one of the cons to the voting is that people were concerned with members swarming a committee meeting. We call it stacking or whatever. But I would prefer to have, the stacking done at the committee level and not the board level, because when that happens, it almost seems like the meeting is interminable. It just goes on and on and on and on. I think that increased participation in the committee and the ability to vote on the committee serves a purpose for shortening discussions of the issue at the general board meeting. Because one of the things is that the board meetings just keep getting longer and longer and longer. And it's becoming a situation where people just don't want to attend the board meeting because it goes on forever and ever. And there's people that would prefer to serve on a committee than to sit there hour after hour after hour because it just doesn't end. So I think that if we get more increased participation on the committee level, it has the potential of shortening the discussions at the general board meeting, so that we can have a 90-minute, a 60-minute, or a 90-minute board meeting instead of a 2 and 3 hour meeting, which ultimately at the end of the day falls on poor Cindy, who has to record all of this. That's it.
A 60-minute board meeting. Wow. Beverly? Oh, sorry. B, I saw you waving fiercely.
Who's next?
I'm going to call on B.
Okay.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I have a concern. I think non-board members should be able to vote at committee board meetings, but to look at it in a perspective of a land use. I live on a block, and suppose they want to change the zoning of the block, okay? But I'm not a member of the land use committee. The people on the block think oh, you're on the community board. You should be able to go back to the community board and say something, representing our block. So if I'm not a member of the committee, then I can't vote on it. I think it would be the best thing that, that we would allow non-committee members in order to vote. And it's really a shame with stacking of meetings. With lots of land use and spot land use things, when we give out flyers and stuff, it has to be like, 3 blocks in the vicinity, and we give out flyers and we let them know that there's a meeting happening. For like spot zoning that we're trying to do, it might be that if you're a board member and you live within these 4 blocks, we're going to really listen to you, as opposed to that if I live on 60th Street, and I'm talking about, what's happening on 15th Street, it's really, you got to take it where people are coming from. I think non-board members should be able to vote, but I think we have to really be very concerned about people who coming in just to change the agenda, to follow their own agenda.
Non-board members or non-committee members?
Non-committee members. Non-committee members. I think they should be allowed to vote.
Thank you, B. Beverly?
Yes, I wanted to come back to what David said, and also I can bring in some of the things that B just said. When there is a committee meeting and a board member is not on that committee, yes, they may get pressure from some of their neighbors about an issue that's on that particular committee and coming up for a vote. So I do think that non-committee members should be able to vote. However, I'm going to suggest that when the vote is presented to the board that is identified, these 7 people are committee members and these are board members, but they are not committee members. What do you think about that?
I mean, I like that idea, but I'm going to hold off on I guess on what to do moving forward just a bit until we, I guess, finish discussion. Because I would just want to make sure people have an opportunity to express. Karen?
Hi. I think that David made some very good points, and people are making very good points about some things we have to be careful about. But I don't see when I first of all when at that meeting, that land use committee meeting where that was swarmed, I had been to every meeting, and they were trying to stop me from voting, and I think that was being used to exclude people, and that's not right. And I think it makes a lot of sense that we should make it, if we can make it that, if you've attended 50% of the meetings on that topic, then you should be allowed to vote. The tricky part is, what do you do when there's been an even number of meetings? Someone who's good in math, please let's help me figure that one out. But I think that if you've attended the meetings in good faith, you should be allowed to vote in those meetings. And so far as Zoom is concerned, as a chair of my homelessness committee meeting that no one ever attends, but when we go back to meeting in the flesh, so to speak, I intend to do both live and Zoom, both at the same time.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Karen, I think also the challenge is what to do, like if an important topic, it's like if it's only one issue, if it's only going to be like one meeting and people show up and want to vote, like how do you handle that situation if they've only been to that one meeting?
If they get the information, because at those committee meetings, you get a lot of detailed information. And if you've gotten that detailed information, why shouldn't you be allowed to vote? And the only other thing I want to point out is, regardless of what we vote on this, we may want to consider giving the land use a special dispensation of some kind, because it's the only thing we have any power over. And then to be excluded, I mean, I guess you're allowed to vote on it at the committee level, at the community board meeting level. But that's all I have to say. Someone else speak.
Cindy Vandenbosch.
So I just wanted to raise one thing since we're discussing sort of the structure of voting. And that is, in the case of land use, there are not 2 choices, there are 4 choices that you have to choose from. And the way that our current procedures are structured sort of force you into a didactic, tense situation versus more of a consensus. If we were to institute, like the city council is instituting, ranked choice voting for situations where that way all committee members, or in this case, it would be anybody that's at the meeting, or like, I just think in the longer term, we need to go there because people should be allowed to vote whether they approve with conditions, they disapprove with conditions, or they disapprove. And the way that we currently do it is that there's a proposed resolution that sort of shoehorns every person who's going to vote into either being for or against. And I realize I'm kind of opening a can of worms, but I think this was to me the bigger problem, is that people weren't actually allowed to vote how they wanted to vote because we were forced into this sort of didactic choice when there were actually 4 options to choose from. And we ended up with a no comment, which is not even an option on the form. And so I think, like, structurally, and I don't know whether we can do this, but I would feel a lot better letting anyone on the board, like who's in attendance, that they be allowed to vote. But in a situation where there's 4 options and we have to choose one, and we're technically like not allowed to not choose one, then let's do ranked choice voting so that it more accurate at both levels, at the committee level and also at the board level, so that we get a more accurate reflection of what the consensus base is. And it means that we'll probably in a lot of cases end up meeting somewhere in a compromise. And I think that's good. It incentivizes that.
Nick.
To kind of rehash some of the other points, what I would say is for, folks that really want to make sure that everyone can vote, then there should be no hesitance for participation. I feel like, if you want to stop the vote stacking, if we're very concerned with that, then put some kind of attendance requirement, whatever it may be, and then actually have people show up and participate in the meetings and draft the resolutions. Otherwise, you have, essentially, situations which already occurred. If people actually sat through the entire thing, listened to it, proposed arguments, and then you can actually come to a resolution in committee. Now, granted, IC is a very tricky example, but on most other things moving forward, I feel like that'll be a better way to do it, because you kind of can balance then, participation also with the right to vote if you don't sit on that committee.
Seeing no other hands, just to address your point, Cindy Vandenbosch, I absolutely hear you. I think the way voting occurs, I think is simple, but I think it's a little bit too simplistic. But it's also part of, folks are gonna hate me saying this, is part of Robert's Rules of Order, right? Ranked choice voting actually violates Robert's Rules of Order. But there's a way kind of around it, but it's very, I don't want to say convoluted, but it is complex. So there's kind of a way to do it. It's just a little complex. And I don't necessarily know if we as a board are there yet or prepared to go there yet. I certainly am not prepared to go there yet. And I don't think many board members are prepared to go there yet.
Julio, may I respond? I agree, but I wonder if this is then like a longer term, like something that we can respectively kind of look into and discuss, realizing that this is an issue and a challenge with the current system that we have in place.
Oh yeah, I agree. It's gonna take a heavy, like it's gonna take a heavy lift. David Estrada?
Yes, I thank you, Julio. You mentioned part of what I was going to say is that part of that is the facilitation by the chair of the committee or the parliamentarian and chair of the board in structuring how the regular order flows. And so there are means to address some of the things that we're worried about. If we become good collectively, not just leading and imposing Robert's Rules of Orders, but functioning under them ourselves. That's a first idea I was getting at. So I want to kind of back you up on what you just said. I appreciate that you brought that into the room.
Thanks. So I'm hearing that there folks want folks want board members to vote at committees, but there's some hesitation on concerns of, I don't know how other way to say it, but swarming, particularly around some of the, I guess, land use or some of the other issues. What suggestions I have, earlier today when I had some brief time, I started jotting down some, I guess, proposed language that I think fits some of the conversation that we're talking about. And if my computer unfreezes, so there, I guess we're not using this one, so I can strike this out. But I guess option 1 and option 2 are two, I guess, options that we can consider. And if you need me to make this bigger, let me know, I can. Option 1, provides a mechanism to allow board members to vote at committee meetings, but makes it so that at regular meetings, it's just committee members. And similar to how we've been doing, I guess right now, in order for for non-committee members to vote at committee meetings, it would require a vote of committee members to allow non-committee members to vote. So I guess it provides like a safe gap. I don't like using that word, but I guess it makes it so it just allows a step so that you allow non-committee members to vote, but it just gives an opportunity for folks to participate. I guess we can create another option to incorporate what David had suggested, because I'm thinking like that's also something. And then the other option is making it plain and simple, or just eliminating and just making it clear that all board members may attend and vote at committee meetings, regardless of their committee assignment. And then I can move this down and then just put in, I guess, make this the option 3, which is create draft language on what David has suggested. Pat, go ahead. I see your hand up.
I'm actually rereading option 1. I believe that was what was done for the IC situation. And I I kind of like that. At the, give me a minute to read it again. I'm like, still trying to absorb it.
Julio, can I ask a point of information in that interim and help me? And I forgive my ignorance. Does a committee need to establish quorum? And would non-committee members, and if so, would non-committee members count towards quorum?
So that's actually an excellent question. And I had to look into my Roberts rule, and I'll show you. I had to look into my Roberts.
You keep it with you.
I keep it with it, and you can't see it because my screen thingy hides it. But I keep, because I use it so frequently for my other, I can't say it here because it's partisan, for my other meetings that I have quite regularly where I have issues, I have to reference this quite often. So I looked up committee meetings, and you actually do not require a quorum for committee meetings, but which I find really weird for committee meetings. So obviously, if your committee is 5 people, you need more than one person to conduct business for that committee meeting. But if there are 2 members present, a majority of members present is 1 person. Go ahead, Cindy, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask a question, which is, I kind of like this first one too, the idea that the committee gets a say in terms of whether you're going to open it up. I do like that, and I'm glad David asked that clarifying question. I just wanted to ask the question. I'm also like interested in the idea as an alternative of committee vote being reflected in the resolution, and also if we don't go with this, the committee vote plus these were the way that the rest of the attendees who serve on the board voted. I would be okay with that, but I think it's the option 1 is the least clunky. But it doesn't necessarily, it means that we aren't going to necessarily have language that addresses the issue of people not kind of participating in meetings over the course of many weeks. But I suppose you could always, in discussion, when you vote on that as a committee, whether you're going to open up the voting, you could always discuss that and call it out as a concern. I'm just wondering what the other model, if we are going to reflect, what that would look like. Because it seems like that's interesting to people, but I just like, does your vote count or not? If you're not a committee member, but you felt one way or the other, we just include that in the minutes, or what? How does that get folded in? To me, it's less clear than if we went with option 1. Yeah,
I think we need to clarify what constitutes the official record of the vote. So so for example, you allow non-committee members to vote at that meeting, does that mean that the official record is, if you have allowed 3 non-committee members to vote at that meeting, now making it, using my previous number of 5 plus 3 is 8. I had to think about that. That's how tired I am. So that means, let's say all 8 voted in favor. Does that mean now the official record is 8 and not 5, right? So because the official act was that you allowed non-committee members to vote, does that make it so that it's 8, or all 5 committee members voted in favor plus 3 non-committee members? Like, I think my assumption is that because the official act, and this is very in the weeds, my assumption is that because the official act of the committee by the bylaws was that they allowed non-committee members to vote, thus the total number is now 8 in favor. I don't know whose hand up was first, Karen or Pat, so you can. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Go ahead, Karen, go ahead. I'll go after you.
I think actually option one could get really ugly. Think about some of the chats we've had. You know, I think option one could get really dicey. I'm leaning towards option two. If after you said, regardless of their committee assignment, you put if they've attended 50% or more of the meetings, and then we'd have to specify if it's 1 out of 1 meetings, they get to vote. If it's 2 out of 2 meetings, they get to vote. If it's 2 out of 3 meetings, they get to vote, you know, and just they become honorable committee members because of their attendance, and they get to vote. I don't know. Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I guess what's bugging me is the word public members. Could you please define what a public member is?
So that is a person who is not a board member who is appointed to a committee, a committee. So for example, I'm just going to use Julie Brockway. Julie Brockway, who was assigned to the Education Committee.
Oh, okay. So yeah, she's, in my opinion, as a non-community board member serving on a committee, should be allowed to vote. What I mean, that's
I wholeheartedly agree with you. But I think there's been a lot of confusion about that because not every committee that wasn't necessarily clear. Like if you're appointed to a committee meeting, you're supposed to be allowed to vote, and that's not been the practice.
okay. Well, one, I believe I agree that yes, if you are not a community board 7 member, but volunteer to be part of a committee, like the guy, what's his name, Robert Martinez, who's not a board member, but I know he's part of transportation, they should be allowed to vote. I am a little confused because I thought we were also talking about community board 7 members voting on committees that they are not on, but come to a meeting. Am I losing it here?
No, it's the same thing.
That is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, see, maybe it's the way you're calling it, public members, because
It's addressing 2 different things, Pat. It's addressing public members who are assigned members of committees are allowed to vote, and should board members who just randomly show up at a committee meeting be allowed to vote?
It's dealing with whole committee committee composition.
Yeah, but I agree with Pat. I'm sorry. It's Cynthia. I had my hand raised. I agree with Pat because I was getting confused and saying, did I miss part of this meeting? Because it seems like public members doesn't make it seem like it's community board members that say like Nick and I, who are now listening to the bylaws committee, but we're not in the bylaws committee. So that's why I got a little confused with the language of who's being defined. And then I had a question. Suppose there's a meeting where the non-committee members outnumber the committee members in terms of voting. That's the stacking part of it. And I understand that part, but since you said it doesn't come, you don't need a quorum for committee, how would that be considered in there? The whole part of not needing a quorum of committee members to do a vote.
So you're saying like,
so let's say right now you only have 1 member of the bylaws committee because the other ones couldn't come, and it's just you and maybe 1 other person. You said that there's no need to have a quorum at committee meetings, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So does that affect the voting at all, or it doesn't? That was my question, because I always thought we had a quorum. So I'm glad you clarified that. I always thought you needed a quorum, and that's why we call attendance at the committee meetings.
So you don't need a quorum. which is just interesting, and I didn't know that. It doesn't affect the vote, but if, let's say, there are 5 members and only one person showed up, being me, I probably would not have had the meeting.
That's what I was asking. Yeah, that's what I was asking, because you wouldn't have committee members actually voting. It may be a vote of all non-committee members, which would be kind of awkward in some situations. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. And
So
then,
that's what I was asking.
yeah, no, I hear you. And then to your earlier point, and to your point and Pat's point, I see your confusion. So we can split these two so that they're separate, so that, because they deal with composition, but they're also, one is addressing public members and one is addressing board members. So we can separate those two.
Yeah, because I think for sure public members who volunteer should definitely have a vote without question they should definitely, they're part of the committee, even, in an official capacity. So that's for sure. Thank you for clarifying. Go back.
Beverly, go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Beverly.
The public member, just a quick question. If the public member is volunteering and voting on a committee meeting, when the committee makes a recommendation to the board, does that public member vote there as well?
No.
Okay, that's what I wasn't sure about. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back. Now that I got it clarified, because I was like, I never even thought that we were discussing non-committee members. I always assumed that non-community board 7 members on a committee were allowed to vote. I mean, do they vote when they have meetings? Anyone that's on a committee with a non-community board 7 member, please let me know. So as back to what I was saying, again, if you are a community board 7 member and not on a specific committee that you're attending, and you're on there because that's something that you're interested in, whatever the particular topic is, you should at least have attended X amount of meetings. And of course, we don't know how many meetings are gonna take. Like, for example, bylaws, we've had quite a few meetings, but at least attend the 3 of them, something like that. But if someone could just answer my question as far as public non-community board members voting at committees, is that a practice happening now? Because if it isn't, it should be.
You mean?
Yeah,
So,
on my committee, I let Sylvia was assigned to the committee, Sylvia Augusto, and she's allowed to vote because she's an official committee member, though she is not a board member.
So then why is that even on here?
So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Karen.
That's it.
So I have, and I can't name the specific because it escapes me at the moment. I have been at a committee meeting where a public member was not allowed to vote because they were a public member.
But were they a member of that committee?
Yes, they were a member of that committee. Their name was on the attendance sheet.
Well, that was so wrong.
Yes, and this was at least a year and a half ago, probably 2 years ago by now.
Oh, but it's not a practice that's happening now, Julio, right? Yes, no?
I mean, I haven't attended that meeting, that committee meeting in a bit, or I have, but I don't think that person has shown up since.
That's probably why. It's a shame.
But I want to make sure, like, I think, like, this is a practice, right? Like, if you're appointed to a committee meeting, it's because you're showing an interest to that committee, right? And I think you should have a voice. And I just want to make sure that's like clarified.
But again, this goes back to folks who are not committee members, because sometimes, again, remember, like I am not a member of the homeless committee, but I participated at the last homeless meeting because I was interested in that. So if there was a vote, I would have appreciated being given the opportunity as a community board 7 member to vote that night.
Cindy Vandenbosch.
I just want to clarify something because I have seen on the committee assignment lists that there are people who are not appointed community board members that have been assigned to committees. Who gets to decide that? Is that actually in our bylaws? And is it also okay with the city charter? And where do you draw the, like, how many, can there be a lot of public members on committees? I'm just wondering, like, how does that decision-making work? Because it's unclear to me.
That's an excellent question. It is in the city charter. It's by appointment by the chairperson, the chairperson of the community of the board, and it is there's no, what is not clear is the length of time that they serve. So it on that committee. So it's indefinite. So they could be there for a month. They could be there for 32 years. And so I think what I put here is that they serve in the time that they were appointed by the chairperson, and they have to be reappointed, so that they don't, not I mean, we want folks to participate, obviously, but it's that they're not just they don't stay on that list for 32 years.
Thank you.
Cynthia Gonzalez.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, this is a very, very, very difficult conversation, but, you know, having a voice and a vote are two different issues because, first of all, our general board meetings and our committee meetings are open to the general public, to everybody, you know. When you have a voice, whether you are a board member, a committee member, or a member of the general public, that voice is what can sway the member vote. You see, so this is the issue at hand here. The real issue is that, you know, who has a right to vote? We've never given the general public a right to vote on committee issues or board issues or anything like that. But the community voice, whether they are a board member or a committee member or just the general public at large, if they come into a committee meeting, their voices are going to be heard at that level. What we're kind of used to having is the general public's you know, voice, you know, being given only in public comment. That's where they get to say what they get to say, unless they come to a committee meeting because the issue at hand is important to them. Going back to what people say, you know, I live in Windsor Terrace, I live in Sunset Park, oh, my block has this issue, you know, the people on my area should be the ones, you know, to have that voice, right? We should all have the voice, but what we want to hear is the people that are going to be directly affected by whatever, you know, vote may be proposed or come up with, right? So I just want to, you know, say that the issue at hand here with voting, it has to do with, you know, which voices are we willing to hear on a board level, on a committee level, on a community level. I said earlier that, you know, I would rather have the swarming happen at the committee level where, you know, we're going to take a vote that we're then going to recommend to the board. You know, I would rather it be contained in that particular situation. So, but we, we can't just look at the fact that whether you're a public member with a vote, or whether you're a committee member with a vote, or the general public that attended that particular issue, that doesn't have a vote. So, I just feel that committees are important because they should be containing what we don't want to happen at the general board meeting. I know I'm repeating myself, but I think that if the discussion can stay on the level of the committee level, I think that, we would have a better outcome, whatever options we decide here. I know we have the options, but, none of these options express the voice of the general public who comes to these meetings. So that's all I have to say.
Pat?
First of all, you're gonna kill me, Julio. To my recollection, when I brought up this whole thing, I was the one that said that we needed to discuss CB7 board members who are not on a committee, on that particular committee, to be able to have the opportunity to vote. Now we're including the public members. So my question is, in regard to public members, is this part of the city charter? I mean, can we do this? Should we separate this? Should we just stick to community board 7 members who are not on a committee being able to have the ability to vote? I'm opening a can of worms here, but I'm like reading this and I'm like, is this a little bit too much right now?
So yes, this is part of the city charter in chapter 70, that public members are part of the community board.
No, I know
I'm sorry,
that.
that public
No, that's-
members are part of the committee. It clarifies that they have a vote, because
Okay.
that's not clear.
Okay, perfect. Then that answers that question. Okay, that's fine.
Mhm.
I didn't.
And again, as per previous things that we do and edit, anything that we vote on will be sent to the lawyer before it gets shown to the board and discussed and voted on.
Absolutely. That's a must. That's one thing that we all agree on. It has to be
Yes.
reviewed by an attorney before anything. That's
Yes.
a given.
So I'm just looking at the time. It's 7:15. I haven't eaten dinner yet, and I'm very famished. And I'm looking at Natasha's face. So I'm not sure where folks are feeling at the moment. I feel like can we eliminate option 3?
Yes.
Okay, I see thumbs up. Okay.
Am I allowed to vote?
Oh, that was funny. So let's go ahead and eliminate option 3. So I think the conversation now is where we're feeling between option 1 and option 2. I think.
Could we append option 2 to have an attendance requirement?
I'm obviously open to that. I think the concern with the attendance requirement is, let's say you show up to a committee meeting and we don't have I've been to 3 meetings, but you can't prove that with the documents, right? With the attendance records. like
Well,
how
the chairperson would have to keep track of that. The chairperson has copies of their attendance records.
I don't.
I started asking for mine because I have such a problem. No one comes to my meetings.
So why are we doing roll call if nobody's keeping track of who's attending?
Oh no, the board does. The board keeps track of attendance. I'm saying like, then I think that would put an onus on, at each committee meeting, we should have like past attendance records. And I think that's fine. I just think that also places a
Burden.
requirement, a burden to make sure that we're looking at like attendance records. So like that we're making sure that someone says, well, I've been here so I can vote, and you have to,
Well,
or take it on just good faith.
Why don't you just, when a person does their minutes, have a list of who was present? Because it's not like it's 51 people that came to a committee meeting.
Julio, it would only be an issue if you wouldn't have to have a record of all attendance for all meetings for all eternity. Your meeting has an agenda. And if this is the first time that topic has been raised, then you don't even have to look it up. If it's a second time, then you have to go back and get your attendance from the last meeting. And it is an
Assume we may have 50 people at a meeting.
If I can just say something a moment there regarding the attendance. The attendance is taken at every committee meeting because we have to share it with the borough president's office. They require us to send the attendance, whether it be for the board meeting or committee meetings, we are required to send it to them. So that is why attendance is called at all meetings.
That's good to know.
Yes.
I see a couple of hands up, and before I call on them, I think maybe the requirement is that it's the previous meeting instead of like the last two meetings. And I'm just gonna suggest that before we move forward. And again, I can't tell which hand was up first, so I'm just gonna go in the order well, I'm not, because I see Nick is chewing, so I'm gonna go with David.
Thanks, Nick.
All right, I might as well start.
I think I hear.
Option one, I think option one covers it very, very well. Having option two, I have a feeling it leaves us open for, no, option one for me.
Thank you, Joan.
Okay.
David?
I'm feeling like the spirit of this conversation around somebody having attended a certain number or a certain percentage of meetings is about establishing that they have a stake in the conversation or expertise, or it's on their block, or there's some, that there's some substance to their attendance. But I think that gets really tough because, what if there've been 3 meetings about a topic, and the 4th is the one where a vote is going to be taken, and that board member walks in and they just happen to have a fair amount of expertise about that topic, regardless of having attended the earlier discussions, or it happens to be on their block and therefore they're a pretty high level stakeholder, even though they didn't attend the previous one. What happens? What happens when you have a meeting where you think you're going to take a vote during that committee meeting? It gets complicated, like, I don't know, bylaws. And all of a sudden it gets strung out to 4 or 5 meetings. So now you have someone who attended 1 or 2 meetings and they kind of were there in good faith, but now the actual vote isn't going to happen till some meeting off in the distant future. I don't know. I think, I'm wondering if counting percentage or number of meetings attended is the way to get to what it sounds like we want, which is that anyone who votes has a stake in the topic and it's making an informed vote. So is there some alternate where we can have the person demonstrate that their vote, is arriving in good faith and with a bit of thoughtfulness behind it. I'm just, and maybe I'm quibbling over it, but I'm trying to run this through real world scenarios that we've all seen with committee meetings over the course of the last few years. And I'm trying to think of it in practice, in some of the little things that we are bound to encounter. Am I off in the woods, or is there some way to do that without counting the number of meetings?
I mean, how would that differ from option 1 without, like, you're still attending a committee meeting and then the committee votes to let you vote?
Yeah, I think option 1 kind of has that built in, because one could say, hey, among our committee, this is a vote, but it's a pretty minor topic on a very specific thing. And you can have just walked in the door an hour earlier and make a perfectly valid vote. Okay. Or, hey, it's this giant land use thing, and it's going to take a little bit of commitment before we all feel like we have, a shared say in this. So what I was addressing was this side conversation that's coming in around half the meetings, or a certain percentage of meetings, or 2 out of 3, or what if it's only 1? What if it was supposed to be 1, but it turns into 5? And, so it just sounds like going down this road of complication instead of kind of in the option 1 sense, saying, a committee operating in good faith can make a pretty good decision about whether non-assigned board members who are not assigned to that committee would be worthy, not worthy, it's the wrong word entirely. I'm trying to flip this around, because a lot of this conversation has been about controlling people who want to do something. And I think another angle of this conversation is bringing voices into the room that we need to hear, who might otherwise be excluded. So I want to think of this in the positive mode. So I'm worried at a bylaw level, when discretion is taken away from, say, a committee chair, or something that's naturally baked into regular order, and we start specifying, you have to be at 63% of the meetings if it's under 7 meetings, but if it's only 2 meetings, you have to have been at both of them. But if it's 1 meeting, what if you came late? As it gets very tough at a bylaw level to make that operational in a practical way with all the variations we see in the world. Sorry, I actually had to talk that through, so I'm sorry I took time to say that, but I hope I made myself clear.
No, I got it. Nick?
I would somewhat counter David's argument specific to option 1, because then you open that up to something that could be contrived as a popularity contest. If there was a individual that may not be particularly popular on the board, that may have that expertise or may have participated, and everyone on that particular committee just does not like the person, they could vote to say no. And so you've opened it up to a different way. Whereas if you put a universal attendance requirement or some form of attendance requirement, it's no longer a vote. It's no longer something that could be contrived as excluding people. It's, did you come to the meetings? Yes or no. You did not come, therefore you cannot vote. And the other rebuke that I would have towards, if you have a particular issue that you care about on your block, well, you serve on the board. So even though there might be an issue happening in Windsor Terrace and you live on 39th Street, you should care about what's happening on Windsor Terrace, because the people from Windsor Terrace have to go sit through the 15 meetings we have about the things that happen in Sunset Park. So, again, it boils down to participation. You're on the board to volunteer. You're on the board to do something. And if you only want to selectively show up for the things that bother you, then that's fine. But then you shouldn't have the ability to go vote on the other issues.
Pat?
Wow.
I'm sorry I have to interrupt, guys. I have to take this call, but I vote for number 1. So I have to go, guys. Sorry.
Thank you,
Bye.
Joan. Have a good night.
You too, thanks.
Number one, Julio, and I don't know if anybody else agrees with me. Is there any, the word public members of committees, should we maybe say non-community board members versus public members? I don't know, that is kind of like a way of differentiating.
So I just use public members because that's what's in the New York City Charter. That's what they call them, public members. So I didn't want to use non-community board members to be aligned with what they're named in the charter.
All right. I do remember for the Industry City thing, that was if I remember correctly, it was a vote that was made to allow the other community board members to be allowed to vote during those meetings. I'm not opposed to 1B at all. I mean, all of this is kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. But the point is, at least for me, that if you're a community board 7 member and you attended a committee meeting that you're not a member of, but you wanted to be there because your voice was important, you should be allowed to vote. So that's how I feel.
Karen?
Ditto on everything Nick said. And also, I think if you do make it a percentage and we're clear about the percentage, that's actually the cleanest way to do it. It doesn't bring personality into it. It doesn't bring, someone is timid and might be cowed by having to vote against someone or for someone. It's not personal at all. It's just very cut and dry. Did you attend the meetings or not? And also, you're going to get into a scenario where you have, Joe is a committee member. We've had 5 meetings on one topic, but Joe only shows up to the 5th meeting. And he gets to vote on on Susan, who's shown up to every meeting, and now Joe gets to decide that she can't vote if he so desires. I think it should just be a numerical, just this is numbers, it's math. Do you have the information? Do you care enough that you have attended? And if it's 1 meeting that's on a topic, and I think you should be allowed to vote. If it's 2 meetings, we have to decide here today, but we could decide either, you should have been at both meetings or maybe 1 is enough, but we should just, go through the first 1, 2, and 3, or maybe up to 5 meetings, whether that person can vote or not. And then it's just a percentage. If you've been to more than half the meetings, you can vote. There aren't very many topics that are more than 2 meetings. I mean, I'm done.
Points well taken.
You're on point. You're on point. It's true.
Cindy?
Yeah, could it simply be like majority? I understand, like 1 meeting, yes. Like if it's just a 1 meeting thing, I think and it's 1 meeting, 2 meetings, and then beyond that, it's like 3 and up. Have you been to majority of the meetings? And if you have on a particular topic or issue, I think it's important that we highlight that, because it's a question of like, is it about the issue in particular that's being addressed and has been extensively discussed in multiple meetings, right? Like you just don't want to avoid. I do want to open up and allow space, but there is often, public comment and speak outs and all that kind of stuff when we do go through a land use process. But I do think when it comes down to voting, you should have attended majority of the meetings, so you're informed and have been part of some of those conversations, how many ever meetings there have been. And I just wonder, like, is there language we can put in where it's like the community board members or the public members, which addressing Pat's question about definitions, that's something the lawyer can do in the document, is define what a public member is if that's needed. But we could just say that for the public members and for the non-committee members to vote, they must have attended, like, for topic specific vote, at least. And this is not the perfect language, please help me here, but majority of the meetings.
In excess of 50% of the meetings.
Sure. And if it's one meeting, then you've been at majority of the meetings. The question is two, like, is it, you know, I guess that's the only outlier, but I just want to put that forward. Because I personally don't want to get into having in discussion, if there's a motion to open up the voting, if we go with option one, if we open it up and then in discussion, we start like talking about, well, this person hasn't attended and this person, I don't want to get into that. Like, I do agree that that could create a lot of issues with between board members. I don't want us policing one another in that way. Whereas if we have a clear line, then there are rules of the road. It's just a question of operationally implementing it.
So I think what I'm hearing is there's concern about, with option one, that it can open up some like interpersonal dynamics or concern, and having like on the vote, there can be some kind of like discussion that is not productive to the topic of the meeting. But I'm also hearing like, I actually share David's concern about like putting some kind of like numerical requirement. I think I feel a little iffy about that because it just adds another meeting like a requirement. But I also think that is like, I get it. I think we're trying to encourage participation, but then I just feel like it gets a little iffy if it's like, if it's one issue or if it's two issues. It's like, well, what if I couldn't make the last meeting, but this is an important topic? I don't know. I feel iffy about it. I'm not necessarily.
Julio, just one thing. I mean, could we just put language where we put it on the individual committee members that they make a good faith effort and attest to the fact that they've attended at least 50%? So we're not necessarily policing this, but it's all, there's an understanding across the board that in order for us to proceed in like a civil manner, that people would recuse themselves if they've not been part of like the majority of the conversation or majority of the meetings.
And are we thinking, sorry, Nick, I see you, just give me 30 seconds. Is that something that to be done in like changing in like option one or in option two? Two? Okay. Okay, I need some guidance because it's been a long day, so I'm losing it a little bit.
If they've attended 50% of the meetings.
Okay, so all board members may attend and vote at committee meetings, regardless of their committee assignment, if they've attended 50%.
And then we might want to have an explanation about, well, I guess that doesn't need an explanation, because if it's only one meeting and you're in attendance, then you've attended 100%.
So I just want to clarify if they've attended 50% of the meetings or 50% of the issue that's being discussed, because those are two very different things.
Good point. 50% or more on that topic.
Or items on the agenda. Because if it's 50% of the meetings, and then an argument can be made, it's like, well, why aren't they just on the committee?
The committee meeting.
Then why aren't they on the committee?
Because that particular topic interests them. So we're talking about attending 50% of that topic, not 50% of all committee meetings. Am I right?
No, I'm just saying, like, this is why language is important. So if we say if 50% of the the committee or 50% of meetings, that's if there's been 6 committee meetings
On
in a
that
year.
topic, on that topic,
Okay.
on that topic, not that we had 6 meetings and you have to be at all 6 meetings, because all 6 meetings could be 2 totally different topics at all times. Am I right? Anybody?
So how about if you put, if they have attended relevant meetings regarding the agenda items? Attended at least 50% of relevant meetings on items, on agenda item, on items being voted on.
Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome.
50% or more.
Yeah, it should be in excess of 50% as per Nick's suggestion. And I also think we should hold the public members of the committees accountable to being the same attendance requirement. Like you can't parachute in at the last minute, right?
And just being voted on, Julio.
Say that one more time.
Being and on voted is missing.
And public members, if you're not a member of the subcommittee, you can't vote anyway. It's only if you're on that committee as a non-community board 7 member.
Yeah, I'm just saying we add the exact same language after that first sentence, comma, and basically like the same as long as the public member has attended in excess. It's basically repeating the same thing twice, but it needs to apply to public members and to.
No, actually it's different because public members are already committee members. It's different.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because we're just talking about like, so for example, Nick, who is a board member, but not a bylaws committee member. And he just feels super passionate about non-board members voting on committee meetings on very specific topics.
I agree.
Just using that as an example. Okay, so public members of, I'm just reading out the language to make sure I have this right because I also need to read it. Because public members of committees shall be voting members of said committees and shall serve in their capacity for the term appointed by the current chairperson. All board members may attend and vote at all committee meetings, regardless of their committee assignment, if the board member has attended in excess of 50%, oh, I need to fix that, of 50% of relevant meetings on items being voted on.
Sounds good.
Should we say a majority instead of 50%? Just to make it like has attended majority of relevant meetings.
Yeah, I
But then
prefer
what's
majority.
I like majority.
A majority is just more than half.
Yes.
So
Majority of.
Julio, what I was actually going to say is I was going to retract the comment that I had made in regards of in excess of 50%, because you can have a case where you could have potentially 2 meetings of 4, and then that person wouldn't be able to vote. So actually, I think what you'd want to say would be 50% or more. And then that way you've had at least half and you kind of collect all the different scenarios that could occur. And then you could also tie this back to the official community board attendance records being kept as the reference point.
Could also use plurality.
Now we're getting fancy.
I don't think you should use that word.
50%. Stick to numbers. Math doesn't lie. Math doesn't have an emotional stake in it. It's just math.
How does that work?
Looks good to me.
Cynthia Gonzalez? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I appreciate the work, of everybody doing this. I am not a bylaws committee member. I guess I'm a public member or whatever you want to label me as in this particular scenario. But as a board chair, I do want to point to the fact that, well, prior to Zoom, it's been very difficult to get members to attend committee meetings. I know that this has been said before. Sometimes you're like a committee of one when you show up and you have a choice of either going on with the board meeting because you have people in the community that came out and you're just one person, right? So you want to present what it was that was on your agenda and whatever. But the fact of the matter, the fact always comes down to, enforcement of committee membership attendance. Because if you have committee membership attendance, maybe a lot of this conversation that we've had today would not be happening. We're doing this because we see that committee members don't come to committee meetings. So if board members come to committee meetings, then we have to take them into account because they're the public, they're the people that are there outside of, the community or including the community that came out for that particular issue. So my problem is, like, am I only gonna go to committees that have an issue that interests me? Or am I gonna show up because I'm a committee member and I'm supposed to be at that meeting or have an excuse for not being at that meeting? So, I just wanted to put that out there because, we've been assigned to committees. Some of the committees, we volunteered for, and others of them we were just put on those committees. But it's an obligation, that we took on, as Cindy said before, whoever it was that said before. And I don't want this to become an issue where, members are going to pick and choose, what issues they want to attend on what committees, and that's what they're going to be, that's going to be their contribution to the board. I don't know if this makes sense to anybody that's listening here, but I'm a person that I have been, subjected to people not showing up because maybe what was being presented wasn't of interest to them or whatever. And all of this is now, why should people that have committed to serving on a committee be allowed to pick and choose what issues are important in whatever committees they go to now, because now they have a vote, they have a voice, they have a, I think we need to look at that aspect also. I don't know how this can be addressed. I know that we're here to try to make decisions and whatever, but, I just wanted to point that out. The central issue of people's attendance to committees is not in no way being addressed in any of this conversation that we're having here. So I don't know what committee that falls on. I don't know who keeps track of committee memberships or committee attendance records or whatever. Because when my committee shows up, there is an attendance sheet that's put out there. That's who lets me know who is there, who from the community is there, who from the board is there, But what do I do with that information?
Maybe that's something that the membership and attendance committee should tackle. And I'm the chair of that, so thanks.
Yeah, because all of this is supposed to be reported to the borough president, but if we have 10 committee committee members and only 3 are consistently showing up, what the hell does the borough president have to do with it? He doesn't enforce anything. This is the problem I think that we need to look at, and that's, if you don't want to be on a committee, then you need to make known that you're not going to be a participant in that committee, and we will get other people to, chairperson assigns a person to a committee, but because we're all volunteers, it doesn't mean that we're slaves to any committee. We'll go if we can, and if we want to, and if we don't, then we don't. So the problem becomes, making all of these changes doesn't address the fact that if you are on a committee and you are not on an active member of that committee, that's like we have 50 members in the community board, and we never make quorum. We're never going to make quorum. I don't see anything in here that says that when a vote is going to be taking place, that a quorum of the members need to be present. So I think that we need to look at that as well.
Karen?
I've been on involved in other organizations, like I'm on my church's vestry, and when you get assigned to the vestry, which is like their community board, it's in their bylaws that you will be assigned to 2 committees and you are expected to attend those committees. Now, there's no real way to enforce it, but there is language in their bylaws that say what the expectation is. So I just want to put that out there. I think it should be a different topic. It should be maybe a different a letter or a number or something, what the expectation is. Because being a board member is not just, it's a responsibility and a privilege. And you don't just sign up to be a board member and then blow off what you don't want to do. And if you don't want to be a board member, then don't be a board member. But if you're going to be a board member, you're going to have certain responsibilities because it's a privilege to be a board member.
I hear you. Pat?
I guess, are we ready to do something? Are we going to table this? Are we going to marinate this? What are we going to do? It's 10 to 9. I'm tired. I'm hungry.
Well, it's 10 to 8.
Look at that.
Don't jump in.
It feels like 10 to 9.
It does feel like 10 to 9. I'd rather not table. You guys, everyone knows how I feel about not tabling. As option 2 is written, I mean, I'm not comfortable with it, being very frank, but everyone knows how I feel about I guess these options. But I think if folks are comfortable moving forward with option 2, it seems like it's the option that allows most inclusion and lets everyone participate if they've had an interest in a specific topic at committee meetings. But it's also not necessarily a free.
But I still, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
That if a vote is going to be taken on the committee level, a quorum of the membership should be there. I think that we can probably incorporate this in some way in the option 1 or whatever option, because I just feel that that's a missing piece here. That's a missing piece. If we're going to have a vote, we should have a quorum of the committee members there. And if we don't, then we have to come back to that meeting, and the people, all of these invested people will be back because we did not make a quorum and we couldn't have a vote to present to the board.
If I'm right, Cynthia, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't have a quorum at a committee meeting, you can't meet. Am I right?
That's
Just like-
correct.
So,
And also, I'd just like to point out that, you know, when we scheduled this meeting, it was, the scope of this meeting was to focus on whether committee members, non-committee members can vote. So I just want to make sure we're just focusing on that. I think quorum is a much different conversation. And we have to look at like the charter to see, like, because they require for board membership, for board meetings and public hearings, you have to have a quorum. And like committee meetings, I think is a little bit different. Like Robert's Rules of Order doesn't even require you have a quorum for committee meetings. So like, I think that just speaks to like the level of, I mean, the work I think is important, but I think it speaks to something different. So like, I'm well open to having that conversation, but I think committee meetings, some committees are rather small. So like, if you want to require quorum, like you'll need, for a committee meeting of 5 or 4, you need 3 people.
Julio, before we get into another issue, I have to put forth the usual motion that it would allow non-board members to vote.
So you like to suspend the rules to allow non-committee members to vote at
On
this
whatever
meeting?
resolution we're about to go put forth.
I agree.
Is there a second?
Yeah, me.
I'm just following Robert's Rules of Order. And who are the committee members?
I'm a committee member.
I'm the vice chair.
Oh, that I know. Okay.
Do you want me to pull up the list?
Yeah, Natasha, who are the committee members? I just want to
I'll
make
tell
sure.
you right now, the bylaws committee members are yourself, Pat Ruiz, vice chair, Joan Body, B. DeSapio, John Johnston, Marilyn Melman, and Cindy Vandenbosch. Those are the bylaw committee members.
Okay.
How many are left on the phone call?
We have B, Cindy, myself, Pat, and Marilyn is here. Let me just write this down. I'll do this on another page.
Yeah, there's 5 members here of the bylaws committee.
Pat, how do you vote?
I'm sorry, we're voting already? Oh.
Oh no, to
Yeah, I've always believed that if you are here, it's important to you, you should vote. Nick, you got me. I got you.
Cindy Vandenbosch.
Yes.
Okay. Marilyn. I think she disappeared. Marilyn Melman. Okay.
Marilyn, you can unmute yourself. I'll try to unmute her.
Yeah, she may have stepped away.
Okay.
In the interest of, I was gonna say bipartisanship, in the interest of, I can't think of the word because I'm so tired. In fairness, I vote yes. So that's B.
B, you can unmute yourself.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, so now that we have majority, so it looks like we're at option 2, which I have highlighted. I guess, is there any other discussion on option 2? Are there any other like changes that we want to make that folks feel comfortable?
Were we voting to allow non-committee members to vote tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so then
We were suspending the rules in terms of Robert's rules. I know we're all tired, Pat. Okay. Does anyone want to entertain a motion to vote on option 2?
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you,
Second.
Cindy. Second by Nick. All those in favor?
How do you want us to vote? Do you want to try unanimous and see if there are any objections?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, yeah. I could do that too. Or
Or do you want us all to, are we doing roll call? I guess I'm just confused.
I was just gonna do by voice because it's manageable. And if there's any objections, chat down. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The motion carries unanimously. I voted in favor, FY. In the interest of
Dinner?
no, not in the interest of dinner, in the interest of supporting the voice of the board. So what I will, in terms of next steps, I will incorporate this language into this, which we have already. These are all the same thing. Nothing has been changed. It will go into this section, which is the committees right here. Obviously, the 1A, 1B is going to be different. It's just going to be ordered different. And then it will be sent to the lawyer for review. And if we get it back in time, the first reading hopefully will be at the March board meeting. Any questions before we close the meeting?
I'm sorry, Julio, I do apologize. My granddaughter have FaceTimed me. What did you say about when it's going to the attorney?
If I incorporate the language into this document tonight, ideally, I'd love to send it to the lawyer tomorrow. That's highly optimistic, so probably not till Friday.
And whom shall I, oh my God. Who is the attorney that you are sending this to?
To the borough president's counsel, Tanya Candlo, who's been super helpful.
Thank you.
Great. Is there a motion to close the meeting?
Before you close the meeting, if we can all get a copy of what you're sending to the attorney for us to just look at ourselves too, that'd be great. Thank you.
Abso. Motion to close the meeting.
Second.
Say good night.
Motion to say good night. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.